Hi, this is Vanessa Gorman, and this second video on the basic Greek verb is going to be an introduction to how you form the imperfect and aorist indicative active. Again, you don't have to obsess about this, you don't have to reproduce them, but if you can see how to spot them, you will save yourself time and energy. Both of these forms, the imperfects and the aorist active, start with an augment. They normally add an augment as a prefix. That's one of the marks of this past tense. An augment is simply an epsilon tacked on the front of the word as a prefix. Now, of course, if the verb starts with a vowel, then something has to give. If the verb has a prefix already, like apohoreo, sorry. The apo is the prefix away. It's just a preposition you're going to learn in a few chapters. The augment goes between that and the root. So the omicron of the prefix, the preposition prefix, drops completely, and you wind up with an epsilon here in apehore. When the stem begins with a vowel, then that vowel is lengthened if it's a necessary part of the word. However, it acts very regularly. So if you're trying to lengthen out most vowels by adding an epsilon to the front, then most of the time what you get is an eta. Not surprising, right? Long E is an eta. If you add an epsilon to a iota, it just becomes a long iota. An epsilon to an omicron becomes an omega. Epsilon to an upsilon goes to a long upsilon. Epsilon to I becomes an eta with a iota subscript. So if it has a diphthong with a iota in it, that iota drops to the subscript. So it's not hard to spot. You can, if you know the root word and you know it began with a vowel. The problem is when you don't know the root word, you have to start guessing how to look it up. Alphaeus will help you with this because I, in my day, would spend hours looking for a certain form, and it turns out, you have to start second guessing what was the original vowel before the epsilon got added to it. Alphaeus does that for you in a fraction of a second. When the verb ends with a vowel, that vowel also contracts and lengthens when you add a personal ending that begins with a vowel, right? When vowels come together, they contract. But again, it does it pretty regularly, so it doesn't really cause troubles. Epsilon plus epsilon equals epsilon iota. Alpha plus epsilon is a long alpha, so this is not going to give you much trouble. So let's remember the imperfect. The imperfect is continuous or repeated action in the past. It starts from, you form it from the present stem, which is the first principal part, which is the lemma. So how do you form the imperfect? Well, the first thing you do is identify what the present stem is. So you take the lemma form, the first principal part, and you take off the omega if it's active or the omai if it's deponent. Okay? Once you've got that, you've got your stem. Then you have to add the augment that we've already talked about that you use in both imperfect and aorist. And then you just add whatever the personal endings are. In this case, we have the third person, singular and plural. And for the active, this is e and on. For the deponent, it's eto and onto. Now, I have a new in parentheses there, right here, right? That's what we call a movable new. Some words, especially in this case, the third person singulars, end with a short epsilon. And if the next word starts with a vowel, or if the verb is the last word in the sentence or the clause, they will stick a new on there so that you don't lose the sound. So it doesn't contract, essentially. This is like our equivalent of using a and an. So a truck, an ambulance. So you'll see these movable news on certain forms, but especially on the third person singular. So it doesn't change the meaning whatsoever. It just makes it easier to pronounce so you don't lose the meaning. So here's some actives, imperfect examples. The lemma is given first, and then the imperfect third person singular form and the imperfect third person plural form. So pempo is a pretty regular verb in the imperfect. Pempo, pempsa, pempon. So pempo, you take the omega off to get the stem pemp. You add the augment and then you add the personal endings epsilon and omega, omicron, nu. So he was sending, they were sending, right? Likewise for archo, you take the omega off to get the stem. It begins with a vowel, so when you add the augment, it lengthens to an eta. And then you add the personal endings and on. He was ruling, they were ruling. Boy, thao, you add the augment, but it's a contract verb, an epsilon contract verb. So when you contract epsilon and epsilon, you get epsilon iota. And when you contract epsilon omega, omicron, you get un. Okay? So you'll see this aboethun, and you'll say, it's got an augment, it's a past tense, the thun, I know what that's doing. That's come from the third person plural. You'll know how to translate it. Okay? Likewise with the alpha contract, he was conquering. That Hellenika becomes a long A because the alpha of the stem combines with the epsilon of the personal ending and becomes a long alpha. Enikon, the alpha becomes an omega when it combined with an omicron. So he was conquering, they were conquering. So that's pretty straightforward, and that's what most verbs are going to look like. Of course, the common words are a little bit different. Deponents, they're the ones that end with omai in the lemma, so you take that off to get the stem, you add the augment to the front, and you add the personal endings to the back. In this case, instead of a and on, it's eto and onto, so it just has an extra toe on it. You still translate it in an active way. So we get some examples of deponents here. Gig no mai, you take the omai off to get gign. You add the augment at the beginning, you add eto and onto to the end. He was becoming, they were becoming. Machomai, same thing. Erchomai begins with a vowel, so the epsilon becomes an eta when it adds the augment. And then hegeomai ends with a vowel, and so that epsilon is going to contract when you add the endings. And you get hegeto and hegonto. So very straightforward, right? So far. Imperfect is not difficult. It's this, you just saw it. Aorist is trickier. And unfortunately, aorist is probably the most common. Aorist is a little trickier because it doesn't always take the same stem, and it has various sets of endings. So let's kind of walk through it. And again, remember that you don't have to reproduce it, right? All you have to do is recognize it, and even then you can use Alphaeus to help you. You can use an analyzer to help you. You never are working alone, right? So aorist represents completed action in the past, and we divide it generally between what's called a weak aorist or a first aorist and a strong aorist, the second aorist. The weak aorist is the easy one because it just absolutely regular, just like the imperfect is absolutely regular. The strong aorist gets a little wonky, but in ways that are, if not predictable, at least recognizable. They're not predictable unless you're a linguist, but you can easily learn to recognize them and smell that that's an aorist. It's built off the third principal part, and the third principal part is the active form that ends with usually sa or a, and sometimes on. And if it ends with sa or a, it's the first aorist. If it ends with on, it's the second aorist. So if you look here, I've given you some examples, and if you look, thuo, the third participle part, is ethusa. That makes it a first aorist. Archo becomes erxa. That's okay. Echo become eskon. Okay, wait a minute. That's funny. That's a second aorist. Lambano elabon, second aorist. Epemsa, first aorist. So you can see immediately, if you know the third principal part, the aorist form, you know which pattern it's going to follow. And the first aorist is very, very regular. Um, you get the stem from the third principal part. It's not always the same stem as the present, but it often is the same stem as the present. You check, you add the augment, although, okay, let's be real. The third principal part already has the augment in it, but there will be an augment there, right? You just take that third principal part. You will add a sigma, which is already in the third principal part. If the stem ends in a vowel, it will often lengthen before the sigma, which is, again, already in the third principal part. So if you have the third principal part of a verb, all you've got to do is change the personal endings. And in this case, all you do is remove the alpha and you add epsilon and on. Okay? This is very straightforward. So here's some examples. Thuo, ethusa, the sigma is the sign of the aorist. Ethuse, third person singular. Ethusan, third person plural. That's all it is. So the th is the only part of the stem here. Strateuo becomes estrateuse and estrateusan. But again, the third principal part already gives you all this. And if you click on the verb in the text, it will tell you, as we already went through, it's the third person singular aorist indicative active. So not a problem. Now, some of these words, when they add a sigma as the sign of the aorist, have a problem because the stem is already ending in a consonant that doesn't pronounce well with a sigma. And so that may change. So for example, if the word ends with a gamma, a kappa, or a he, and you try to add a sigma to it, it becomes unpronounceable. And so it becomes a xi. So archo becomes erksan, okay? Because ch becomes a xi. Lego, you can't say Lexon, right? It just becomes a xi sound. That's what the xi does, is combines those consonants. So when you see that xi, yes, it may be part of the original stem, but chances are it's enclosing the sigma. Praso and prato also take the xi for reasons that linguists can explain, but I'm not going to try. Labials become psi, as you might expect. Pempso, pempse. It's just the psi sound. That's what a psi is, a p plus an s sound, right? So that's easy enough. You see a pempse and you say, ah, there's a sigma in there. A number of forms lose the sigma completely. So you don't get the sign of the aorist because they just lose it and lengthen their stem vowel if it's short. So apectino, apectine, he killed. Apectinon, they killed. Meno doesn't take the sigma. Instead, it just lengthens out its stem vowel to emeno. Bino lengthens even more to ebesa, so it loses the nu in this case. This is why aorists can be odd, and you need, with the common words, you get used to them. With the uncommon words, most of them will be regular. If they're not regular, you've got alphaeus. Contract verbs lengthen the vowel ending the stem, as you would expect, before you put the sigma on. So adikeo becomes adk sa and adk san. Boitheo, also the epsilon of the stem, when you added the sigma, became an eta. no problem. Otherwise, it looks the same. Nikao, the same thing. Pleuo, lengthened out to eu. More contract verbs. Poiao becomes epoiesa. Again, you just start seeing the eta sigma and you say, oh, that's an aorist, right? That's one of the hints. So what about the deponents? Again, deponents will typically begin with the omai in the first principal part. If they continue as aorists, they will have samain or amain, omain in the third principal part. Now you can see erchomai becomes regular by the aorist. On the other, what it's happening is it's not the same word. They glom two different words that had the same meaning together. So we don't really have erchomai in all the various forms. It becomes active by the aorist. These others, you can tell the first aorist from the second aorist by samain or omain. So if it's got the sigma alpha, it's a first aorist. So that's pretty easy, okay? You take the samain ending off, the amain, leave the sigma, the stem may lengthen, and you add the regular endings, which in this case are ato and anto. So you see the sigma, you see the augment, and then you see ato or anto, and that's a deponent. It could be a middle, but if it's, you know, the word's a deponent, for now, that's all you're going to see. Second aorist gets trickier. There is also an augment, as before, but there is no sigma in the second aorist. Instead, the stem changes. Second aorist also uses the exact same endings as the imperfect. So e and on in the active, eto and onto in the deponent. So the only way you can tell a second aorist from an imperfect is it has a different stem. Often what happens is the vowel weakens. It can be quite irregular, but mostly the vowel weakens. What do I mean by that? Well, here's a good example. Feugo becomes fugon. So the au shortens to a u. So feuga would be the imperfect. Fuga is the aorist. They fled. Lambano loses the mu in the middle of the word. It loses the n at the end of the word, the nu. And so it becomes, Lambano becomes elabon. Now notice one thing. The third principal part, I fled, I took, is the exact same as the third person. So the first person singular and the third person plural of the second aorist are identical to each other. You just have to figure it out from context, but that means if you know the principal parts, you know the third person plural as well if it's a second aorist. So elabe, elabon. We get some very irregular things happening in the second aorist. Ago does something that we call reduplicating. It doubles this consonant in the stem, so it becomes egage and egagon to lead. Balo, on the other hand, loses a vowel. So balo becomes ebalon. So the only way to tell it apart is there's only one lambda in it. To attack, to throw, or if you throw against, you attack something. Apothnesco, again, shortens itself to apothano. Hyreo becomes hylon. That's totally different. Echo becomes eskon. Again, looks pretty odd. It seems to have flipped around, but some linguistic things are going on there. In the deponent of the second aorist, you've got the same thing going on. You just add eto and onto. So here the first person is not the same as the first person singular. Egenomen is not the same as the third person plural in the deponents. Aphikneomai shortens to aphikomen. Gignomai shortens to egenomen. Right? So they changed their stems. Erchomai, I talked about, that just becomes totally irregular. It's not the same word at this point. Me verbs, very few of them. Very common and very irregular, and you just have to learn them on a case-by-case basis. There's just no way around it. Um, a me, I am, has no aorist, fortunately, but in the imperfect, it's ein and ason. You'll see these a million times. I told you there's compounds. Pare me, I am present means to be, I am beside. Or ape me, I am absent, to be away from. And you'll see both of these. Ditto me, I give, becomes edidu and edidoson in the imperfect, edoka and edoson in the aorist, and frankly, there's a bunch of other forms that show up at different times. Ditto me is very irregular. It's got some weird forms. Histe me, I stand or I set up. So I stand or, I physically stand myself, but I could also set up a flag. I could set up an army. I could do all kinds of things. So histe and histason, heste and hestason. Um, Finally, we have apolumi, which is not as problematic because it keeps the pole in the middle, so you can spot it pretty easily. Again, there's others like tithemi and others like that, hiemi. But for now, these are the four you'll see the most. So back to our charts, you'll see I've given you in each case the imperfect forms and the aorist forms. So if you want to just keep this one page next to you, you can do that. And the more you refer to it, the faster you will learn the forms. These are the ones that will be found in the common vocabulary. These are the only ones that will be found in the common vocabulary sentences. And then in the some new vocabulary sentences, a lot of them will use these as well. Some will use other verbs that follow patterns that you can use Alphaeus to analyze them. You can also try to suss it through yourself. So if you want to memorize these forms, memorize them. You won't be wasting your time. Once you have the whole sentence, simple sentence, pretty well mastered, then we will move on to other common forms of the verb, including infinitives and participles, including first and second person, including other tenses. But let's keep it simple for now and concentrate on the rest of the parts of speech.